When you think of homesteading, you might think about tons of cows, open rolling fields, lots of acres of land to play around with, but homesteading in the suburbs is definitely possible, and I'm going to show you exactly how. Hey guys, and welcome back to Mini Urban Farm, a channel about gardening and homesteading in the suburbs. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my 10 favorite ways to homestead in the suburbs, and a lot of them are much easier than you would think. Now, I do have an entire list of 25 ways to homestead in the suburbs. You can find that over on the blog. I'm only sharing my top favorite 10 with you today, but I will leave the link in the description below if you want to check out the entire list. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So first off, what is homesteading? Now in my head, homesteading means to live as sustainably as possible, living off the land or making do with what you can, just doing it yourself basically. It's this attitude of I don't have to rely on the supermarket for everything, I don't have to buy, everything at the store, I can do some of the stuff myself. Now with that kind of mentality, homesteading in the suburbs is completely possible because you can do a lot of stuff yourself in a very small space, even with ingredients you source from the store. So number one on the list of ways to homestead in the suburbs is learn to sew. Now I've been sewing ever since I can remember. My grandmother was a seamstress growing up. She had a few sewing machines, and I love to sew. I don't really make all of my own clothes, but sewing is a great skill to have even if you're not making do-it-yourself clothes from scratch, because you're able to fix things. You're able to mend clothes when they break instead of having to go and buy another garment from the store, and it saves you a lot of money. Not only that, but if you have basic sewing skills, you can actually charge people to do things like hem pants or fix a rip or sew on a button, things like that. Sewing really is a great skill to have because you're able to do a lot of the fixes yourself and not have to outsource to another person who may or may not charge you a lot of money to mend things that you have to fix. With that, you're also able to create new things. So for example, you're able to make pillows, you're able to make quilts, blankets, things like that. If you have basic sewing skills, that goes a long way. You can do a lot with just a few different stitches. I mean, it's really, the possibilities are endless because you're able to create things that you would otherwise have to pay for. And on a completely separate note, if you guys see this thing behind me, this is not a pillow, this is Milo. He is here asleep on the couch, so don't mind him. Let's go ahead and jump into way number 2 to homestead in the suburbs, which is to make your own bread. Now, I will be the first one to say that I'm definitely not a baker. Baking is definitely a science. I don't love to bake. However, making your own bread is super simple. You can find recipes online that are just basic, like artisan bread, that only have a few ingredients, and you follow the recipes, and generally it works out pretty well. I'm going to go ahead and skip all that. I'm going to take the easy way out and say to get a bread maker. Now, I got a bread machine for Christmas, and that is like the life-saving grace recently because I love using it. Every day I plop in like 4 ingredients, sometimes 5 if I add some herbs and stuff. I'll just put everything in there. I press 1 or 2 buttons, pick my settings, and then it's done. I mean, I know exactly what's in the bread versus having to get something from the store, which has 1,000 other, preservers and fresheners and all the other stuff in it, which I can't read the ingredients, can't pronounce any of it, but I know exactly what is in my homemade bread. I know it's water, salt, yeast, and flour, and sometimes herbs straight from the garden. So I know exactly what I'm eating. I know exactly what my family is eating, and it's super cheap. I mean, once you get past the initial investment of buying a bread maker, which is actually not that expensive to begin with, then making homemade bread is actually a lot cheaper than buying $4 loaves at the store. Alright, so number 3 is to start a vegetable garden. Now, this is one of my absolute favorite ways to homestead because in a small vegetable garden, you're able to grow so much of your own food. Currently, I think I have maybe 500 square feet in the entire garden, in raised beds just outside the house. We have, I think it's like less than a quarter acre. We live in an HOA community, and we have an area behind the fence that I've just dedicated to building a small garden. And we're actually able to grow all of our own vegetables and all of our own herbs straight from the garden. Now, I don't know if you've ever gone to the store and looked at how much organic vegetables are. They go bad really fast, and they're really, really expensive. So, I mean, when you plant out things for the season, if you're able to calculate ahead of time how much you need for the season, you're able to actually provide food for your family for the entire next season and then have some to preserve as well. Plus, there are so many ways to start a garden. You can start a raised bed garden, you can start a container garden, you could start a food forest, you could start so many different things. I mean, you could literally have just a couple of pots with some plants on them. You can try small space garden and plant very densely so you're able to get a lot of food from a very small space, which makes starting a garden one of the easiest ways to garden in the suburbs. All right, so number 4 is to get some hens for eggs. Now notice I did not say get chickens. All right, hens of course are chickens, yes, but if you are looking for eggs from chickens, right, you don't need a rooster to help you get there. Hens will lay eggs just about every single day with or without a rooster. The only thing that you would need a rooster for is to fertilize those eggs in order to get more chickens and maybe raise them for meat or something like that. But keeping hens for eggs is such a great way to homestead in the suburbs. They do not take up a lot of space. Hens don't make that much noise. Yeah, they cluck and stuff, but I mean, all birds do that. It's just basically the way nature sounds. So even if you're in a small space with regulations, you could probably get away with having some chickens for eggs, having some hens for eggs in the suburbs. Chickens also make great manure, so you can take that manure, age it, compost it, put it in your garden to create more fruits and vegetables for your family. And then those same leafy greens, those same vegetables that you're growing, chickens can eat a lot of that. So, Milo, okay. Chickens can actually eat a lot of that, and I feed my chickens from the garden. The manure and the eggshells, all of that gets put back into compost and it feeds the garden, and it's just like this ever revolving circle, and it works out really well, especially in a small space. And while we're on the topic of raising animals, I'm going to go ahead and add in our next way to homestead in the suburbs, which is to raise quail. So if you've never thought about raising quail, let me tell you why you would actually want to raise quail and why they're so perfectly suited for the suburbs. Quail lay about an egg a day, just like chickens. Their eggs are actually more nutritious than chickens. Granted, they are smaller, so you have to eat a lot more of them to make up the same size as you would one chicken egg. Quail eggs are just a tiny bit smaller. Quail are also really great for meat though, and they're really easy to process. We learned to butcher quail earlier this year just to see if we were able to do it before we jumped into the livestock game, and it wasn't really that hard. Now, quail provide a lot of protein. They grow really fast. Their turnaround time is, I think, like no more than 8 weeks. We are planning on getting quail in just a few weeks. Actually, we should have some eggs on the way, but quail is such a great way to homestead in the suburbs and to keep livestock. They don't make a lot of noise, so a lot of people will raise them in the garage or in a spare room or something like that. You can raise them in apartments, and even if you're just looking for them for the eggs, they're such a great addition. Okay, so next up is to learn to make your own pasta dough. Now, in order to make pasta, you should have some basic skills, which I'm not going to cover because if you're homesteading, then I'm going to go ahead and assume that you have some basic cooking skills. But making your own pasta dough is actually a lot of fun, and it is so much healthier than the store-bought version. I know exactly what's going into my food. I'm able to put food on the table. It is not that difficult to make pasta dough, actually. I would encourage you that if you're going to make pasta dough, get a pasta machine, get a pasta maker of some sort. They're not that expensive. I think mine was like under 40 or 50 bucks, and I use it all the time. Once a week, I make an entire batch of dough. I roll it out using the pasta machine. I use the pasta machine to actually cut all the shapes and all the linguine, fettuccine, all that stuff. And it's just a really fun project, especially if you want to involve the kids in it. They have such a blast making pasta dough. It does not take that long. And as an added bonus, I actually use my chicken eggs in the pasta dough, which eliminates one of the ingredients and makes it that much cheaper. Alright, so on to the next one, which is to learn to preserve your own food. Now, you can preserve food in a variety of different ways. My favorite personal way to preserve food and things from the garden is by freezing them. Now, I know that if the power goes out or something like that, then, you know, the freezer turns off and all of your stuff kind of melts. Here in Florida, we have hurricanes sometimes, so that's kind of an issue, but they're very rare. I'm in Central Florida, and we don't often get hurricanes, so I'm not too concerned about that. Freezing is definitely, I think, one of probably the easiest ways to preserve your own food, which is why it's my favorite. But I freeze just about everything that comes from the garden. I freeze green beans all the time. I freeze carrots. I freeze okra, all the stuff that we get from our garden. When I have extra, I take a freezer bag, I just plop everything in there, and then it's frozen. Sometimes you might have to blanch things. I found that with a lot of things, you don't necessarily have to blanch them before freezing them, so it works out really well. It's super easy. But you could also try canning your own food, which is a little bit more of a complicated process, but still not difficult. And you're able to put up food in the pantry without refrigeration for at least a year or two, I think it is. And then your family has food for the next coming seasons, and you're not letting that food go to waste. Now, you could also totally do this with food from the farmer's market. You don't have to grow your own food in order to preserve food. If you have extras that you know are going to go to waste, or you buy extra for the purpose of preserving them, then you could definitely just buy organic produce, and freeze them, dehydrate them, can them, preserve them in any way that you see fit, and then you have extra just in case anything happens. You know, we've had a very crazy year, the past year and a half or so, and there have been a lot of food shortages. There have been a lot of shortages of everything. So learning to preserve your own food just ensures that you have food in case the grocery store doesn't. All right, so next up is making your own compost. Now, making your own compost is a little bit of an adventure. If you don't know where to start, I have an entire video on how to kitchen compost. It does not take up that much space, and at the end of the day, it is not that difficult. Now, getting started in kitchen composting might seem bizarre at first because you're kind of hoarding kitchen scraps and random things around the house to be able to put them in the compost bin, but I find that it is actually one of the easiest ways to save money and live more sustainably by using the ingredients that I would have otherwise thrown out. Now, you can kitchen compost just about any kitchen scraps, any vegetable scraps that, you know, are not diseased, they don't have pests, things like that. You simply take the extra clippings, grass clippings, vegetable scraps from the kitchen, from the garden, just things like that. You put it in the compost bin, you turn it around a couple times. I have one that sits on kind of like metal bars type thing. It takes up maybe 3 or 4 square feet outside in the garden. I rarely ever notice that it's even there. I do spin it every couple days, and then about 5 or 6 months later, depending on the temperature outside, depending on the light, all of that, a good couple months later, then you're able to take that same compost, put it back in the garden, and the garden is essentially feeding itself. So every season, at the beginning of the season, I take that compost, I top dress all my plants, I add new compost to my raised beds, I amend the soil with the compost, and I even use it in my seed starting mix. So homemade compost is such a great way to use something you already have. You don't have to do anything extra. You can create a compost bin without a store-bought one. You can create compost piles. Now, I choose to use the ones that are actually bin form that you can buy off Amazon. I love that one, and it's such a great way to homestead in the suburbs. All right, so next we have plant a tree guild. Now, if you're not familiar with what a tree guild is, I'll go ahead and tell you I was not either. So we actually bought a piece of property still in town, so it's still in the suburbs. We'll eventually be selling and moving over there, you know, in the future sometime. But for right now, we have limited space. You can still plant a tree guild with very limited space. A tree guild is essentially 1 tree or 2 trees that act as the canopy, sub-canopy, and then they have bushes underneath them, they have vines growing up the trees, they have root crops underneath the dirt, underneath the trees, and it just acts as like this little mini ecosystem. Now, this can be done at a very large scale, like a food forest, if you have several acres, but if you have just a small space, you could definitely plant 1 or 2 tree guilds. I mean, small dwarf trees do not take up that much space. You can plant dwarf fruit trees, and then you can plant things underneath them like blueberry bushes. You can plant carrots, root crops, sweet potato, things like that underneath it, and they all work together in this little miniature ecosystem that you're able to harvest from on a regular basis. The benefits of planting a tree guild: 1, you're growing more food in otherwise wasted space, because usually in the suburbs at least, you don't have tons of stuff growing underneath trees. You just plant out a tree and then underneath it, it's just wasted space. So you're able to use that space to produce food, but at the same time, you don't actually have to take care of those plants a whole bunch, because what happens is the ecosystem generally takes care of itself. You plant things that are nitrogen fixers in the soil, that helps the other plants. You plant things that are, you know, taller and the leaves drop, that helps with mulching for the other plants. You plant ground covers out as well, which helps with the water evaporating from the soil. All of these things feed into each other, and the process that you have to do to take care of it is very, very minimal. Another great way to homestead in the suburbs is to fix it yourself. Now, a lot of us may or may not have a lot of do-it-yourself fixing skills, crafty, handyman type skills, you know, hanging a painting or fixing a leaky faucet or just anything that breaks around the house. If you can manage to Google how to fix it or YouTube how to fix it or find, you know, someone to teach you the skills on how to fix it, that goes a long way. Not only are you able to save a whole bunch of money, you know, a lot of people come out and they'll charge you an arm and a leg just to repair, you know, an outlet or something like that. But if you're able to do it yourself, then that's another skill that you're able to have and take with you in case you need it down the road somewhere. And at least for me, I would rather do something myself, learn the skill to do it, and have it for future use than to have to pay for it every single time I need it. I remember back in my previous house, we had a leak in the faucet or something like that, something related to plumbing. And I don't know if you guys know anything about plumbing, but plumbing can get really expensive. Now, I'm not a plumber. I don't claim to have all the skills for plumbing, but when I saw that guy come out and just do a few minor tweaks, I asked him to tell me, and I asked him to show me exactly what was going on. And he was nice enough to show me exactly how minor it was to fix and to show me how to do it myself, so that next time, if I had that same issue that was a minor repair, I wouldn't have to call somebody and spend hundreds of dollars just to come get it fixed. Alright, so those are my top favorite ways to homestead in the suburbs. Like I said, if you want to get the full list of 25 favorite ways to homestead in the suburbs, some of them are really creative, by the way. If you want that, I will leave the link in the description to the blog article where you can read all of that. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe for more urban homesteading, urban gardening, urban chicken videos, all of that stuff, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!